The cathedral bells toll, slow and thunderous, rattling the stained glass windows. A tiny girl, no taller than the sword strapped to her groom's hip, walks the endless length of the aisle. The wedding gown, sewn from the kingdom's finest silk, pulls around her feet like a snowdrift. She stumbles under the weight of a gold crown far too big for her head. Each jewel winks under the flickering candlelight, but to her it feels like a shackle. The king waits at the altar, 40 years old, a veteran of battles and court intrigues. His face is a wall of stone, his eyes cold and unblinking as they watch her approach. His hands, resting on the hilt of his sword, do not extend to help her. The crowd shifts, whispering. Some marvel at the opulence. Others avert their eyes. The incense is suffocating, the air thick with perfume and politics. Her small fingers clutch a bouquet she can barely hold. When she reaches him, she tilts her head up, searching his face for kindness. She finds none. The priest raises his voice, but over his words, the narrator cuts in. History calls it a royal union. But let us tell the truth. This was the theft of a childhood, and the beginning of a life shaped by power, betrayal, and survival. The marriage of an 8-year-old girl to a 40-year-old king was not an act of romance, nor even a union of mutual respect. It was a transaction, a calculated move in the ruthless game of medieval politics, where innocence could be traded like coin. In the courts of France, such arrangements were not whispered scandals. They were paraded as triumphs of diplomacy. The child bride was a pawn, her small hands forced to carry the weight of alliances that would decide the fate of kingdoms. But beneath the jeweled crown and silken veil lay a truth too disturbing for the royal chroniclers to record. She had no voice, no choice, no understanding of the life she was being thrust into. Her wedding night would not be a celebration. It would be the beginning of a slow, unrecorded tragedy. This is not just a story of one forgotten girl. It is a window into an era when royal bloodlines were built on stolen childhoods, when the power imbalance between monarch and bride was so vast it could not be bridged by even the purest heart. The court saw her as a political gift. The king saw her as his possession. But history looked away. Today, we will not, because a story, buried beneath centuries of gold leaf and pageantry, deserves to be told in full, with all its cruelty laid bare. And in the telling, we expose a dangerous truth, that behind the grandeur of royal marriages often lies the quiet suffering of those too young to speak. She was born into privilege, but not the kind that promised freedom. From the moment her first cry echoed through the stone halls of a family's estate, her worth was measured not in the love she inspired, but in the alliances her hand could secure. She was royal, yes, but only in name. In truth, she was property, a pawn on a board she could not yet see. Her nursery was filled not with the carefree laughter of play, but with the quiet murmurs of strategists and advisers. The dolls she once clutched were soon replaced with scrolls, family trees, and the intricate rules of court etiquette. Every curtsy was practiced until her knees ached, every smile perfected to mask her true thoughts. By the age of 5, she could recite the noble houses of France and their rivalries as easily as other children learned nursery rhymes. From the lips of her governess came the same refrain, "You were born to serve the crown." And in her innocent mind, service meant honor, perhaps carrying flowers for the queen or greeting foreign guests with grace. She did not yet understand that the service they meant was her body, her name, her very life, signed away for a treaty or a border. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves burned gold outside her chamber window, she sat on the floor beside her niece, the only adult who spoke to her as a child, not as a symbol. The nurse wove ribbons into her hair, humming a lullaby older than the kingdom itself. For a moment, the world shrank to the gentle pull of the comb, the scent of lavender oil, the warmth of a hand that had never struck her. The nurse leaned down, whispering, "Stay small for as long as you can, little dove." She didn't understand why the words were said with such sadness. But years later, standing in a cathedral in a gown far too heavy for her thin shoulders, she would remember them and realize they were a warning. The king was a man both admired and feared. At 40, his name was etched into the songs of court minstrels, the warrior who had defended the realm against foreign invaders, the ruler whose armor gleamed like the sun, whose speeches could bring men to tears. In the eyes of his subjects, he was a hero almost divine. But in the shadowed chambers of his palace, the truth was colder. His victories were calculated, his kindnesses transactional. He did not see people. He saw resources, tools, and threats. Even his own court tread carefully, for his temper was swift and his punishments legendary. Beneath the veneer of strength lay a gnawing fear. His line were fragile. Years of political unrest had left the throne unstable, and though he had taken wives before, none had given him surviving male heir. His advisers whispered of succession crises, of rival houses ready to seize a crown. He needed an alliance so ironclad that no one would dare challenge him. She was that alliance. Her bloodline was ancient, tied by thread-thin connections to the most powerful noble houses in France. Through her, he could unite factions that had been enemies for decades. But there was more. Her family's loyalty came with land, soldiers, and gold. To the king, her age was irrelevant. In fact, her youth was an advantage. She would be pliable, moldable, a queen who would never think to defy him. The marriage negotiations were not conducted in candlelit parlors, but in smoke-filled war rooms. Maps were spread on tables, treaties drafted, and every clause written to secure the king's dominance. Her father bowed his head, signing away his daughter's life with the same pen he used to seal military orders. She was not present when her fate was decided. While men in silk robes and polished armor debated the dowry and the size of her retinue, she was in another part of the estate, tracing embroidery patterns on a scrap of linen. She did not know that, in the space of a single afternoon, her name had been spoken in the same breath as a man old enough to be her grandfather. She did not know that the date of her wedding had been set before she had even been told she was to marry. To the king, she was not a bride. She was a solution, and he would ensure that once she stepped into his world, she would never escape it. The morning was a blur of hands pulling, pinning, and fastening. Layers of silk and brocade swallowed her small frame, the fabric heavy enough to bow her shoulders. Gold threads caught the candlelight, but she felt none of its warmth. Outside, church bells tolled, not for her joy, but for the crown's triumph. The great hall overflowed with courtiers, priests, and foreign dignitaries. Lutes and flutes played a slow, deliberate procession as she was led forward. Faces turned toward her, some admiring, others calculating. Her heart pounded with each step, but her training kept her chin high. The king stood at the altar, draped in crimson and fur, a figure of authority and possession. When she reached him, his hand closed over hers, firm, unyielding, a grip that told her she belonged to him now. It was not affection, it was ownership. She repeated the vows as instructed, the Latin words strange on her tongue. She did not know they bound her to a man for life, nor that the church and law gave her no right to refuse. In this world, a girl's consent was assumed if her father spoke it for her. Marriage was not a union of hearts, it was a contract, and she was a property exchange. When the priest declared them husband and wife, a cheer rose from the crowd. She felt the king's fingers tighten, a silent reminder that she was his prize. The music swelled, the banners waved, and the air smelled of roses and incense. But beneath the grandeur, her stomach churned. She was a child dressed as a queen, standing beside a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a political conquest. And in the echoing cheers of the whole, her own voice, her own will, was nowhere to be found. From the moment she wakes, she is no longer a girl. She is a living emblem of the crown. Servants dress her in elaborate gowns weighed down with pearls and embroidery, their cold fingers pulling her hair into intricate braids. Every movement is dictated. How she must walk, how she must smile, how low she must bow. She attends endless ceremonies, morning masses, court audiences, banquets where she sits silently beside the king while foreign ambassadors discuss wars and trade. At every event, she is paraded as proof of the king's alliance and the purity of his dynasty. Her old life vanishes overnight. Letters from her mother go unanswered or are lost by the court. Childhood friends are denied visits. Her days are spent surrounded by attendants who serve her but do not speak to her as an equal. The palace is enormous but claustrophobic. She can never walk unescorted, and guards shadow her at every turn. The laughter of children in the village is a distant memory. Here, she is kept apart, as though her innocence might embarrass the court. In public, he treats her as a jewel, always at his side, always on display. In private, his grip tightens. He dictates what she wears, who may speak to her, even what she may eat. Any sign of disobedience is met with cold, sharp reprimands. If he is displeased, she feels it in his tone, his gaze, and the silent punishment of being ignored for days, a psychological power play that keeps her desperate for approval she never wanted in the first place. Though she is far too young for her body to bear children safely, whispers in the court grow louder. When will she give the king an heir? The medieval belief that a queen's was rested entirely on producing a male successor places an unspoken but crushing weight on her. Historical context here can underline the brutality. In medieval royal courts, marriageable age could mean as young as 12, and consummation was often expected regardless of physical or emotional readiness. Many child brides suffered illness, infertility, or death from childbirth, facts the palace politely ignores in favor of tradition and politics. Though draped in gold and velvet, has become lonelier and more dangerous than the coldest dungeon, because here her prison is invisible and her jailer wears a crown. If historically accurate, early pregnancy attempts begin, either by the king's insistence or court pressure. Her young body, not yet fully developed, struggles with the strain. Describe the symptoms with quiet but haunting detail. Fainting during ceremonies, sudden fevers, lingering stomach pains, and alarming weight loss. Her once bright eyes dull under the constant demands of royal life. She is often bedridden, her chambers thick with the smell of herbs and remedies. Physicians, all men, speak of her in the third person, as if she is an object to be fixed, not a girl to be cared for. The isolation deepens. Her attempt to confide in attendants are met with polite silence or a quick change of subject. The king grows impatient with her melancholy and retreats into other affairs, political or otherwise. She begins pacing her chambers at night, staring out the barred palace windows of the moon, whispering to herself as if trying to remember who she once was. Her dreams are haunted by fragments of home, by the sound of her mother's voice fading into nothing. At court, her suffering becomes a source of entertainment and speculation. Whispered conversations describe her not as a victim but as a failure, too delicate, too fragile, too weak to be a true queen. Some ladies-in-waiting exchange glances when she enters, while ambitious nobles quietly suggest the king deserve a stronger, more suitable wife. The cruelty is not in open insults, but in the subtle, smiling daggers of gossip, the kind that kills reputations before the body has even died. Clothes with an image that shows the inevitable. Perhaps she is carried to a ceremony, too weak to walk, her crown tilting on her head, or she sits silently while courtiers laugh around her, her face pale and expressionless. The audience should feel the suffocating inevitability that her youth has been drained by a system that never cared whether she lived, only whether she served her purpose. Illness, childbirth complications, or lingering effects of malnutrition finally claim her. The death is swift in public record, but slow and agonizing in reality. Describe her final moments. Perhaps lying in a cold chamber, clutching a rosary, surrounded by servants who avoid meeting her eyes. The king continues ruling, perhaps remarrying, perhaps not, but his life and political ambitions go uninterrupted. Publicly, he honors her with polite words. Privately, he replaces her role with someone more fit. There's no scandal, only the seamless efficiency of royal image control. For centuries, her name is reduced to a footnote: young queen, first wife, child bride, stripped of emotion or humanity. Historians focus on the king's reign, not on the cost paid by the girl who never got to grow up. The narrator's tone should be mournful yet unflinching, leaving the audience with the chilling truth. Her life was consumed for power, and history barely noticed.